Hello, everyone. This is Keith Perrin. I am the CEO of Court Square Group, and this is the podcast Driving the Business of Science. Today, we've got a special guest on. We've got Nicholas Dirks, who is the president of the New York Academy of Science. But before we get to Nick, I want to talk a little bit about what this is all about and give you some background on what we're all about. So, this podcast was kind of the thought that I had around all the different people that I get to meet in this business. We are a managed service firm for life science companies, pharmaceutical, biotech, med device. We do a lot of work for anybody that is really with the FDA or any other regulatory body around life science based products that are generated. With that being said, I meet a lot of people that aren't necessarily scientists or developing drugs, but they have a very keen interest in what's going on, and they really are part of that whole ecosystem of the companies that are out there doing stuff, whether it's people doing the work, people around that work and doing something around it, or even researchers. So we've had a number of different people on over time. Today, we're going to have Nicholas Dirks, the president of the New York Academy of Science. I'm pleased to have him on, and let him give a little bit of his background. Court Square has what we call ARC. It's an audit-ready compliant cloud, as well as a RegDocs platform, which is a regulatory environment for any kind of documents in the clinical or regulatory space. And we also have what we call Life Science Launchpad, which helps get life science companies off the ground. With that being said, Nick, love to have you give us some of your background.
Well, thank you, Keith. It's good to be on your podcast. So, I am currently, as you said, president and CEO of the New York Academy of Sciences. It's a very old organization. It's been around, in fact, since 1817. It's been a lot of different things over the course of that period of time, of course. But we put on conferences that are scientific conferences. We actually do some of them in collaboration with pharmaceutical companies. We work very closely, for example, with J&J and Pfizer, among others. We also publish, in fact, scientific papers. In fact, we are the longest running scientific journal in the United States, the Annals of the New York Academy of Sciences. We do awards programs for scientists, often for early career scientists. Our biggest set of awards programs are in collaboration with Len Blavatnik and his family foundation. We give awards here in the US, we give awards in the UK, and we give awards in Israel. And we have a lot of educational programs as well, from early school right through postdoctoral fellowships. And we do fellowships in areas like neuroscience, artificial intelligence, and other fields as well. I've been doing this job since the month before the pandemic hit in 2020. I can remember the day. Before that, I was the chancellor of the University of California at Berkeley, and before that, I was the dean of the arts and sciences and executive vice president of Columbia. So I spent most of my life in academia, not only as a scientist, but of course, working very clearly and directly with a lot of great scientists over the course of my career. And it's great to be here on your program with you today.
Fantastic. Well, I had the opportunity to meet with Nick ahead of time, and we actually talked about a whole bunch of different things in this industry, which I thought was really fascinating. So I hope that we're going to have a really good conversation today around some of those topics. So, it's interesting that you say that you're the oldest Academy of Science. I didn't realize how old you were, and when you said that date, I said, "Wow, that's incredible that it's been going that long." And I think it's fantastic. What was the original impetus for putting it all together? Is there a background story on that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. The impetus was, in fact, that there were a lot of people in New York in the early 19th century who were interested in what was going on in science. A lot of stuff was happening. It was, of course, pre-Darwin, but post the Enlightenment, and there were new and fast-breaking scientific discoveries that were being made, people who were exploring the world. And basically, a group of New Yorkers who were in business or in the university world or in government uh, wanted to get together and hear from some of the top scientists to tell them what was happening. In those days, it was more natural history than the sciences per se, but they basically found the leading scientific authority, Samuel Latham Mitchell, who was called to be an expert witness and kind of authority around all kinds of issues in science, called him and asked him to set up a regular set of dinners and events and lectures where they could hear from him and his friends about what was going on in the world. So it grew out of that. Of course, it's gotten very much bigger since it started as a group of dinner parties in way downtown New York. But it continues the principle of wanting to keep the public informed about some of the latest breaking news in science and technology.
That's fantastic. How do you guys keep up on that? What is it that you do to see where the latest breaking things are happening?
Well, it's partly when you're in the publishing business, you're getting articles all the time that are being submitted by top people in the field. When you're doing conferences, you're constantly working with some of the scientific advisory committees that we put together to hear who's doing the most interesting and late-breaking work in particular areas. I mean, for example, even when COVID hit us, we had a series of programs where we were among the first venues to really give information about what people were learning, both about the virus and about different kinds of therapies. And we did something like 35 programs in the spring and summer of 2020. But of course, we got the advantage of hearing, from these people first. So it was on the basis of that we were able to build other programs and also identify some of the things that people needed to know because they were only hearing from political figures. We're a neutral, as I said, old scientific association. We're nonpartisan. And as you know, sometimes science got a little bit political. So we were trying
Well,
to fill that gap.
well, speaking about that, in this day and age, I know how tough it is for some scientists out there that are doing, really good research work. Tell us a little bit about the whole what's happening in the funding world and things like that with some of the researchers out there.
Sure. Well, first of all, I think going back to where I just, began with the pandemic, we saw, miraculous work in science being done. The production of the first mRNA vaccine ever, which of course was released first by Pfizer and then by Moderna. There are other vaccines too, but it was a kind of milestone in scientific development. mRNA research had been done for a long time, going back to the laboratories at the University of Pennsylvania with Drew Weissman and others, for decades, but nobody had actually made a drug that worked. And so I think a lot of us in the scientific world thought, oh my goodness, everybody is going to say, science, it's great. Look what they're doing. This is miraculous. And then, of course, we all know that there was a lot of contention about the way in which public health was implemented by political leaders and the kinds of restrictions that were handed down about school closures, social distance, closures of other kinds, stay-at-home orders, etc. And of course, we saw a lot of backlash to that. And what that, of course, set in motion was not just a debate, at the very least, about the efficacy and importance of vaccines and safety of vaccines, but also more generally, what is it that these scientists are doing? And meanwhile, there were all kinds of other controversies about the replication crisis in certain areas of science, and also just what and why are all these scientists using all this funding that comes in from the government? Now, of course, with the new administration in Washington, one of the first things that happened was that the universities, some of which I was associated with in my career, were told, we're gonna cut your funding, or we're going to take funding away, or we're going to cancel certain kinds of grants, and so on. Columbia obviously was one of the first that was hit very hard. But in truth, a lot of university research enterprises have been hit by funding cuts of different kinds, both in terms of shifting priorities at National Institutes of Health and the National Science Foundation and other federal agencies in Washington, and through the kinds of orders that have come out of the Department of Education and investigations that have gone on and conditions that have been set for other parts of the university to comply with certain kinds of concerns in exchange for which their funding would be restored. But what we have seen as a scientific agency that simply looks at what is happening is that a lot of really great science got interrupted, really in very, very serious and sometimes damaging ways. Long-term studies of how populations were responding to different kinds of drugs and therapies, long-term studies with animal populations, lots of things, especially in the field of biomedical research, having to do with health and medicine, were stopped because that's where a lot of the big money is, and that's often in university hospitals and medical centers where the bulk of certain kinds of research anyway will take place in the university at large. And so we've heard a lot of stories of people whose work has simply been stopped. Uh,
And the sad part is sometimes it takes the government getting behind some of this research because it is so long term and it is so, it takes a long time to get to the answers that we need for patient safety. And that's what this whole industry is about, is patient safety from a life sciences perspective. I was going to mention, when you were talking a little bit about things that COVID, in the beginning of COVID with Moderna and all the other things going on. Recently Moderna was was rejected for something and then approved back in. It's so political now, and it's crazy out there when you start to think about some of the things that are going on with the FDA. And I'm not a political animal, and I try not to get into politics on this podcast. But the reality is, we rely on the federal government to really help from a perspective of how do we push the United States from a research perspective and drive things. Even to the point, like I was so impressed with when COVID came out, that the concept of Operation Warp Speed and getting clinical trials happening faster and getting decisions to be made much faster, to the point where we actually have, you know, partial submission of trials now, and we're doing a bunch of things. And it seems like we took 2 steps forward and 1 step back after COVID was over, and people were starting to get back things. I was hoping that some of those things we put in motion during that time period would have stayed and would have helped to kind of do more from a perspective of decentralized clinical trials, using more nurses out in the field to do work as opposed to patients having to come into centers like that. So you see that whole mind shift sometimes over time. So it's really important that we understand where the funding comes through for a lot of this kind of research out there, and what's happening with that. One of the things that I think you and I talked about earlier was the concept of not only the research dollars, but who the researchers are. We have a lot of foreign people that come from other countries, and they look at, we are the gold standard, and they come here, and now we see, we see researchers in the United States maybe going to other places. Can you comment a little bit about that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, we did talk about this, and I think it's a really important thing for people to understand that, first of all, let me just put it this way. I mean, you can't have good science without a good pipeline. And that pipeline has to be robust. And not everybody who wants to go into science is going to stick with it. Not everybody's going to be great at it. But you want to have as many people as possible who are talented and have a certain kind of aptitude drawn to the possibility of doing work in science, because it's dealing with so many of the kinds of issues, challenges, problems that we have as individuals, as people who are, bound to deal with health challenges across our lives, but also as a society at large. So that pipeline is critical. But that pipeline not only consists of a lot of younger people who are coming up through the system, including in laboratories and universities, many postdocs who I think were among the most targeted by some of these cuts because they were the first to be able to be let go. And when I talked with folks at the National Postdoctoral Association at their annual meeting last year, I learned that over a half of postdocs in the US either found their research to be some way or another hindered, or began to think seriously about leaving the field of science altogether. So there's that. But of course, there are a lot of these postdocs and early research scientists are international. So they've begun increasingly to uh, have trouble either getting a visa to come or feeling confident that they'll be able to keep their work authorization or their visa. And so they're beginning to look elsewhere. The numbers that are coming out this year about even attendance at graduate schools in the US of international students shows a big reduction, both in number and overall percentage. And the long-term implications of that are going to be huge. But science in America has been so powerful for a lot of different reasons. First, because of federal investment, but second, because the best people from around the world will come here because it's the best science. And so if we drive them away at the same time that we cut funding, we're going to undermine our capacity to be at the cutting edge of a lot of scientific work and development.
Well, and that is pretty sad when you start to think about it. I read articles all the time about different things, and one of the articles that I read was recently about some researchers getting wooed by places like Australia or China and having them come out there. I think you made a great comment when we talked about the fact that it's still only like a drop in the bucket. Talk a little bit about that from a perspective of overall research and the outflow or inflow of researchers coming in and out.
Coming in and out of the US?
Yeah, the U.S. in general. Yeah,
Yeah, so, first of all, I mean, the research enterprise, it's huge, and it is critically fueled, as we've been saying, by federal support. The importance about federal support too is that it often is able to support basic science, and you don't always know what the application of this is going to be, but almost always some discovery in basic science will lead to some major discovery that is very applied, very translational, but you don't necessarily know ahead of time what you're. And I can't tell you both at Columbia and Berkeley how many times I met a Nobel laureate. And they told me they started with a basic research problem, and then they found out, lo and behold, they could make, for example, synthetic insulin, as in the case of Randy Schekman, who's a biologist at UC Berkeley who got his Nobel Prize in 2013. But the point there is that this is a huge enterprise, and in order to be at the top, you have to keep that scale. Uh, and some of the funding comes from the federal government, but increasingly, a lot of it, of course, has come from corporate and industrial sources. That's where the big growth has been. But that growth often is very directed at translational research, applied research. And so it doesn't necessarily lead to the kinds of new discoveries that you need. I mean, mRNA was first designed and thought about in a university lab, and then it was taken up by Moderna and Pfizer and others. So, it's a complex ecosystem. And again, international students, international faculty, international researchers, they're part of that ecosystem. Pfizer itself, as you know, it built the mRNA vaccine really basically through an acquisition of a German laboratory that was staffed and founded by Turkish scientists. So again, it was an international collaboration. But in terms of what we're doing to this, the question is, how long term is this damage gonna be? How long will it last? And what will its long-term effects be? And that's what obviously concerns me because, again, when you disturb a complex ecosystem of the kind that constitutes the glory of American science, you can, as it were, throw the baby out with the bathwater.
yeah, yeah. Good point. One of the things that, as I was looking at your website and some of the things that the New York Academy of Science gets involved with, I saw this continuum of from all the way from STEM programs through that postdoc capabilities and just a connectedness of different levels of science. And one of the things that we thrive on is the ability to work with different people in different constituencies and have kind of an ecosystem of different companies that are working together. Do you find yourself, or do you find the academy that because you have such a wide audience of constituents that you sometimes connect up different areas?
Yeah, I think that's actually one of the great strengths of the academy because we're not we obviously have lots of connections with universities and a lot of academic scientists are part of our network. But we also have these incredible connections with industry, as I said before, with some major pharmaceutical firms. But we also have on our board representation from places like IBM and Cognizant and elsewhere, and other kinds of firms that, work on AI, that work on quantum, that work on semiconductors, that work on a whole series of things. And of course, oftentimes, people who are working in industry not only have certain constraints by virtue of the proprietary work that's being done in their own corporation, but they're in their labs, they're doing their work, and they don't get to interact with people who are doing allied work that can be very, very helpful to them in another industry, or for that matter, in a university or a research institution of some kind or another. We can bring them all together, and because of our kind of neutral positioning and independence, we actually find that in our conferences, one of the most valuable things we do is simply bring people into the same room where they, hear a presentation, start talking with each other, and then begin collaborations. And in surveys that we've done, the most valuable contribution we make, basically, is bringing people together who will start collaborating in ways that otherwise they wouldn't have done. So we feel like that's an important service to offer.
Well, and I think actually it's what's really interesting is, we this podcast is about driving the business of science, of life science, and realistically we focus in on that because that's our main bread and butter. But the reality is, different sciences can really affect different parts of science can affect each other. So when you're talking about AI and different things, we're heavily involved in some AI influences right now from a perspective of helping to get drugs out to market faster, from looking at all the manual efforts that go into clinical trials and different things like that. So it's interesting when you guys are so in depth with some of the IBMs of the world and the other ones that are in AI, but then you're also dealing with the neuroscientists and stuff like that. You must have some great stories about different companies working together, or you know, the light bulb moments when a couple of guys got together doing things like that. Anything you can talk about there?
Yeah, well, let me give you one example, and then maybe another one will occur to me. But the first one is basically during the pandemic, we were approached by the head of research at IBM, Dario Gil, and he said, I set up something at IBM called the High Performance Computing Consortium, the HPCC, and he got support from government and from IBM and then from other corporations, basically to make available high performance compute capacity for people who had good ideas to try to address the problem that COVID produced. And for example, the discovery that you could use a single ventilator on more than one patient came out of the HPCC. But anyway, Dario came to me and he said, let's set up something more generally so we can bring scientists together from different industries, from universities, from government, and so on, and figure out a way to get those scientists networked. So when we have the next big crisis, we can react much more quickly, and we can use the resources of science, whether it's compute power or whether it's a laboratory that can be repurposed for a certain kind of test or biomedical intervention, or using some other kind of scientific resource available from some other firm or entity to deal with whatever it might be, a massive forest fire, a massive earthquake, certain things that weather events that nobody can fully understand, but that require scientists and science to help figure out the right way to respond. So we got IBM and Pfizer and Google and Underwriters Laboratory and a number of others to come together and fund what we call the International Science Reserve, which now has grown to more than 25,000 members worldwide. And that all came out of conversations around a dinner table with the chief medical officer from Pfizer and the head of research from IBM and the head of the COVID response team from Google and head of research at Underwriters Laboratory. So it was a wonderful example and continues on in the work that we do. And people join this thing. It's pro bono, but that's the whole point. We're trying to connect people and keep them connected in ways that could be helpful to all sorts of things. As far as other kinds of connections that are made, it's real, as you know, again from your work so well. Some of the big advances in the life sciences are coming about because you now have engineers working side by side with people working in medicine. And as an example, just yesterday I did a podcast in my studio with an oncologist working on blood cancers, who's developing a new kind of technology, a stent that can identify certain kinds of cancer cells before they fully metastasize and go throughout the body. And it's been designed by a group of engineers for use by oncologists.
Isn't that amazing, huh? That's
And
fantastic.
and you wouldn't get these things. I mean, the work that Robert Langer has done at MIT is another example of, using engineering to develop new kinds of delivery systems that allow you to get the medicine to the affected part of the body and actually not kill the entire organism before you get to deal with the tumor or whatever it might be. So, again, bringing people together from different kinds of backgrounds, whether they're, all researchers or whether they're really from different walks of life, I think it's one of the things that really distinguishes modern day science.
Well, when you're talking about that, it's interesting because I remember going to my alma mater, RPI, for my master's and going to do a site visit. And they talked about how they have a constellation program and they got together a fluid dynamics engineer with somebody on the biology side. And they were actually to do some work around blood flow.
Hmm.
When you start to think about some of those kind of things, it's amazing that one part of science can affect so much or contribute to the other parts, and it's that connectivity. And so I give you guys a lot of credit, and I applaud what the academy's doing and what you're doing to help drive this. And as somebody in the sciences, as somebody out there, I really hope that people don't underestimate what we as a country bring to the table from a science perspective. And we should never ever think about giving up that leadership that we're able to show everybody. With that being said, we're getting close on time here. I'd love to have you give us some final words, Nick, and tell us a little bit more about the academy and in our final words here.
Well, thank you so much, Keith. I think, that last exchange we had really exemplifies, I think, some of the really exciting things that are happening right now in the world of scientific development. Now, of course, we've mentioned AI, and it's something that everybody mentions all the time. But in the context of, starting with the amazing work being done by DeepMind and protein folding, but now, being done by all kinds of entities in the life sciences, we're finding that AI can be, just through its extraordinary power of pattern recognition and like, use of massive data sets. It's able to do work that, would previously have taken us humans a very, very long time to do. I don't think it's ever going to take the place of humans. I know a lot of people have different views on this. I think we're still going to be, kept around for a while. But on the other hand, one of the things that we've been looking at the Academy is the future that new technologies are going to bring about. And while there are all kinds of questions being raised about jobs and about, the employment structures that are going to result from AI displacing early career kinds of positions and the like, in the sciences, there's, I think, huge potential for this kind of new capability to help us advance the pace of some of the extraordinary scientific discoveries that are going to, allow us to not just live longer, but to live healthier, and indeed to use the power of science to really deal with some of the massive challenges that that we see all around us, and all of our families and friends have examples of where some disease that we're working on, trying to find cures for, gets in the way of living a full life. So my hope is that, the kind of work that you do, the kind of bringing together of people from different domains and mobilization of different kinds of skills, technologies, talents, and the like will help move our whole pace of scientific discovery forward in new and exciting ways in the future ahead. So it's been great to talk to you today. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you.
Thank you very much. And I think that's great. I've always been a firm believer that it's data that's going to help us to solve some of these medical issues that we've never thought about before, and tying data from multiple areas together. We're so used to working with patient data and medical records that we're not thinking about tying it back together with weather data or this data or that data, and how are they interacting and things like that. Where, to your point, the supercomputers that we're dealing with, the AI tools that we're dealing with, now these things can actually do their work because now they're catching up. The scalability aspect of being able to solve those problems that much faster are going to really help us to get there. And I think, to your point about the humans, we're always going to be there because it's us It's us asking the right questions of the machines to tell us, give us some answers so that we can keep modifying those questions to be even more incisive on what we're trying to do when we're looking at the answers. So I thank you again today and look forward to having some more conversations with you in the future.
I
Nick,
look
thank you very
forward to
much.
it. Thank you.
Take care, everybody.